My family had a connection to Charles Manson. Here's the story.
Do you ever wonder what a Gen X thinks? Welcome to Gen X Slices.
We're in this thing 46 minutes. You guys want to do the Manson story right now? Fuck. Okay, listen. You guys are typing over here. I gotta quit looking. I'm gonna talk here for a minute. All right. So you gotta slow down for a minute. All right. Before I tell you the Manson story, I need to do a little background with you. I need to explain how I arrived, how this family tie-in arrives with the Manson story. Uh, I had a biological father, and I had a dad who raised me, and some of you know the difference. I will refer to both as dad in the story as it comes up, but I want you guys to know very much, without question, that the man who raised me was the influence on my life. The man that dad. It was my stepfather, but I've never called him stepdad once in my entire life. So we'll set that aside. So the person I'm talking about, referring to as dad in this story, was my biological father, and he went by the name of Wild Bill. He grew up in Southern California in the San Fernando Valley, running around LA in the valley and the beaches. And he was there in the 50s and the 60s. That was his stronghold. And you knew everybody and you knew of everybody. Even if you went down to Orange County, you kind of knew the reputations of the people. You knew where the movie stars and the singers, and you kind of you knew the community. It wasn't as big as it was today. When I hear stories of back then from anybody who was raised and lived back then, it wasn't surprising for just a regular person, a normal person who worked at a grocery store, to know three celebrities and maybe get invited over their house to go swimming. It was such a different feel back then. The stories, the pictures they paint was quite amazing. So a lot of that fits into what my dad told me. Now, uh, my dad was also in the Vietnam War, two tours. He was, I was told my whole life he just served time on a boat and never saw any action. And then when he got out and I was older and he could listen to his stories and his buddies' stories, he was actually captured once. And so that's another whole other story. I'm not getting into that. Um, and so the inner 20, I had to remember all the stuff that I know Mrs. Miranda wants to hear. I had to go write it down. I had to make a phone call and go, when did this happen? And when did this? Because I remembered it, but I haven't spoken of it. In fact, I don't think I've ever spoken of it, the whole thing, ever in my entire life. Now, what I'm going to give you is kind of a cursory point overview on how my dad ties into Charlie Manson in an abstract but connected way. And there are stories that go with each point. I am not going to sit here and go through 6 or 7 points and then tell you each a 45-minute story. Plus, I'd have to call someone and go, remind me again how this went. I remember this part because it's been so long. Now, I will tell you right now that everything that my dad told me could be a fucking huge lie. Every bit of it could be a story. Everything he told me could be 100% true and accurate. With Wild Bill, you never fucking knew what you were going to get. So I've never really done homework to see if all these things tie together. I know other people have, and they said, oh, the timeline seems right, and whatever. So there's the first part I want to tell you is who was Wild Bill. And when he got out of Vietnam, he quickly had the hair down past his belt buckle, never wore a shirt, Levi's, and barefoot the whole time. Then later on in the 70s and 80s, he hung out with a lot of Hells Angels in Santa Clarita. Never a member, never joined, but those were his friends. So gives you an idea on the caliber, a little bit of the caliber of the man. Now, these points are the things that I think were relevant. My dad got discharged from the Army, I'm thinking in the middle of 1967. And the way he tells it, he was discharged from the Presidio, the Army base that was in San Francisco. Now, I'm assuming that back then in 67, it was still a functioning base of some sorts, or otherwise this part of the story is not true. But I think that it was. I think the Presidio still had some active duty stuff. I don't know what their role was. I know now in my lifetime, it's been kind of a museum and it's a historical place. But my dad says he was discharged from there. And he says he spent the first so many months after his discharge in San Francisco. And this is another thing that I'd have to look up. Everyone knows Haight and Ashbury, the intersection there, and that was like a collective point for the hippie movement and peace and love and all that stuff. All right, I'll go along with that. That's kind of historically documented, but I guess there was there an actual neighborhood called the Haight, like Haight and Ashbury, but I thought that's what he had told me, that there was a neighborhood in Haight and Ashbury. He goes, because he used to say it like, I used to hang out in the Haight. I thought he was angry at first, but then I think I remembered him saying, no, that was a little area. It was so many blocks of it, like a neighborhood. All right, the Haight, which would make sense if it was Haight and Ashbury. So that's where he said he ran into Charlie Manson. Charlie, as he called him. And it was, he said at the time in that area, he goes, and Charlie was older than him, but Charlie had acquired a little bit of a following of girls. And Charlie would have these girls trade some of their services for things he needed. And at the time, my dad was a mechanic his whole life. Charlie needed one of his vehicles worked on, or a vehicle that was given to him or something. So my dad says he fixed it up. And I asked him a long time ago, I said, well, what vehicle was it? Because, Charlie Manson was known to have this big black bus. And I thought for sure that was he goes, no. He goes, it was a bus, but it was a VW bus. And I said, well, I don't remember anybody ever talking about Charlie Manson having a VW bus, but whatever. He goes, so I got the bus working. He goes, I got some trade, some bartering for it. And he says, I was done. So why is this important? If that's accurate, then that provided Manson a way to start driving up and down and driving around and doing stuff. Because at the time, the way my dad tells it, he was very eager to get his vehicle up and running because he was stuck. So if that's possible, if that's probable, if that timeline works out, if it wasn't at the time a big bus, if it was a little bus, if there's any proof of that, then that part could be accurate. So sometime around in 67, when my dad got out in San Francisco, then my dad comes back down to the San Fernando Valley into LA, where he knows everybody anyway. Now, at some point during the next year, the way he tells it was that he met up with, what was her name? Susan something. It was, Susan Atkins. She had a different name. Anyway, so Charlie, at some point in the next few months or 6 months or 8 months, goes to buy a fake ID for one of his followers, one of his now he's getting real loyal followers. And my dad wasn't the person who made the fake ID, but he was there handing out the ID with the guy who gave Susan her ID, and says that this guy who was doing the ID stuff, and Charlie wasn't there for this exchange. She just was there. And the guy nicknamed her Sadie, or whatever her name, changed her name, nicknamed her Sadie something. Anyway, I have it written down. I wrote it down. I don't know, named her Sadie something, and just made that the name stuck. At the time, at that moment that they were all there doing the exchange, and I don't remember where they were. I'd have to find out the story on that again. My dad, being the flirt that he was, tried to get her, you don't need to hang out, Charlie. Come on with me and hang out to do some stuff. And I know a place we can hang out. And so my dad tells her, supposedly at this moment, about George Spahn and the Spahn Ranch down in Chatsworth. Not Charlie. No. She doesn't leave with him. She's loyal to Charlie. He's flirting with her. Doesn't work out. He goes his way. She goes hers. And right after that, they end up down in L.A. Charlie does, with his girls, and Susan or Sadie's one of them, and they end up staying with Dennis Wilson. Sorry, Dennis Wilson. So everybody knows that story that Dennis Wilson and Charlie Manson were close for so many months, 6, 9 months and thinking now it's like in the middle of 1968. Now, everybody knows that there was a falling out with Dennis and Charlie. And eventually, Dennis cleared out all of his stuff and left his lease on this house he had in Long Beach or Malibu, where it was. And so Charlie had to leave. Well, Charlie had no place to go. And now he's got some real followers. Now he's got some, I think they're all women, like 20 women. He's got them following and he has nowhere to go. And at that time, Susan or Sadie tells him, hey, I know of a place we can go. We just got to go find it and talk to everybody. And she tells him about Spawn Ranch. So now, inadvertently, my dad has been responsible for fixing his car where he can start traveling all over. My dad was partially responsible for nicknaming, or was there when the nickname for Susan changed to Sadie. And now, inadvertently, a year later, he's responsible for giving through Susan the information for him to go see George at Spawn Ranch. Do you see where this is going? How this indirect, direct stuff is going on? All right. So I guess the way my dad tells it is that they didn't just go directly knocking on the door for George. They didn't go directly and live there. They had to kind of live in campsites and little outbuildings farther out until they got to know him. Then Charlie talked George into staying there. Then they all moved on the compound, and now they're in. It wasn't just like walking, you're there. I guess there was some finagling. So another weird twist to all this is that there's other complications that come and go with how Manson ended up shortly thereafter. Within the next year, the big murders happened and everybody was arrested, everyone went to jail. But one of the topics that came up was, and we all know just through, if you just even watch anything on Charlie, is that there was a falling out between Dennis Wilson and him. And my dad told a story to me probably 85 or 86 and said, well, there was a bunch of little shit that was a falling out with Dennis and Charlie. He says, but there was one moment when Dennis knew he was done and had to get away. Now, I'm going to tell you this from my dad's point of view. Obviously, I wasn't there. I don't know anybody was there. He said that Charlie had told Dennis, hey, I need to scare the shit out of some people. I guess there was a guy who was trying to get, he was either a relative, a father, a brother, a cousin, trying to get one of the girls to leave Charlie's circle. And there was other girls that were like, well, if you can leave, we can leave too. If you pull this off, we're going to go. And Charlie was feeling the vibe and was going to put a squash to it by taking this guy out to a remote place and scaring the shit out of him. And he told Dennis, he goes, you got to come along. You got to see this. We're just going to scare him up. Everybody was smoking and drinking and I don't know, whatever they did back then, LSD or acid, I don't know. So they all agreed. And so they go out to this remote place. It's pretty far away with this guy. And Charlie starts running his game on this and telling him all this stuff and scaring him. And the few people that were there were laughing because they knew there was just a scare thing. And then Charlie killed him right there on the spot, shot him. And the location was at a mine shaft, an old mine shaft. There's a lot of California mine shafts around. There's a lot. Pushed him down the shaft. Now, my dad tells a story that everybody freaked out and talked about who said what. And after that, everybody drove home. Nobody's talking. And then for the weeks after that, it was just kind of like a holy shit. Did you see what happened? Now, my first question was, I said, what were you doing there? And he goes, I knew where the mine shafts were. So I'm assuming that somehow Charlie got in contact or Susan got in contact. I don't know. I don't know who did what. I also know that my dad always said he was friends with the Beach Boys in their outer circle. Maybe Dennis did. I don't know. That's how he said he got there. So I didn't give that story too much credit, being in a mine shaft and whatever. And no one ever mentioned it. And then it was years later. One of the Beach Boys, other than Dennis, I think it was after Denny died. One of the Beach Boys put in their book, it's either a book or an interview, and someone asked them, about Charlie and Denny and all the stuff. And they had said, yeah, well, it's really bad. And he moved out. But, the thing that got my brother, Denny, I guess it was one of the Wilson brothers, had said, Dennis always told us that the turning point in that relationship was when he saw Charlie kill somebody and push him down a well. That means to me that Dennis told his brothers about this event, just got the Mineshaft versus a well part. Maybe they got that mixed up. But that became, for me, like, holy shit, he was there. I didn't say much about it. So that's kind of the overview. And there are stories that go along with each one of these. Like, there's a little bit more about the bus repair. There's a little bit more about the fake ID. There's a little bit more. You can see what I'm talking about with that. But when I put it all together in my head, and like I said, every single bit of this could have been a lie from him, or every single bit of this could have been fucking true. Every bit of it could have been true. But when I sit back and look at it from an overview, I'm like, I point at my dad and go, so you put his car together and he started driving around and found his way to Southern California. You were there when she got her nickname that everybody knew her by, and gave the information about Spawn Ranch. So you eventually got Charlie to Spawn Ranch. Not only did you fix his car and get him down there, your information got him to Spawn Ranch. And then you knew where the mine shaft was and were part of it. It just bothers me. So I have no idea if any of it's true. There are people in my family that swear that none of it's true, but I will tell you one thing that happened. And it was funny because just before I went on Tonight Live, I was talking with Gen X mom and she's like, I didn't really hear all those. I heard some of it, but I said, well, you can listen in and hear the rest of it. But there was one thing when I was young. Remember, some parts of my family go, the whole thing's made up. None of it's true. Some parts of my family will say, no, everything's true. But there was an old woman in my family who I loved and trusted very much. And when sometimes at a family get together, this story would come up, or a part of the story would come up. And she was a very wonderful, loving person. And I remember one time, after a brief discussion with people arguing and saying stuff, in the room kind of cleared, I remember her turning to me and she did this. She goes, oh, and your dad, if he just hadn't gotten mixed up with all that Manson stuff. And then she walked away. She wouldn't say shit if her mouth was full of it. And I remembered that. From a person who didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to be involved, her heart was racing anytime anybody brought it up. To turn and say that made me think that there had to have been something about something. Who knows what? So I do not want anybody knocking on my door asking me about this shit. There's been so much research and homework. If there's 50 researchers out there that have already written books on Manson, hey, debunk the whole thing or tell me, hey, we've been looking for that guy. We always knew there was a guy. Well, then there's your guy. All right, Ms. Miranda, have I satisfied your curiosity? All of you degenerate extras that want to know bad stuff about bad people, have I satisfied you? I haven't looked down. I haven't scrolled down. I missed a lot. I got to go look it up right now, but I will. And then I'll read your responses. You guys tell me.